Welcome back to The Common Historian, the podcast where we dig in deep to the mysteries that blur the line between history and the unexplained. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today we're traveling across the pond to a council house in North London, where in 1977, the impossible became everyday reality for one ordinary family. The Enfield Poltergeist case didn't just capture headlines, it captured imaginations. Divided experts and decades later inspired Hollywood blockbusters. But strip away the movie magic, and you'll find something more complex and disturbing than any screenplay could contain. Over the next 40 minutes, we're going to peel back the layers of this case like an onion. We're, we'll start with what most people know and then dive into the evidence, the controversies, and the key players, and, of course, the questions that still haunt investigators today. Because the Enfield Poltergeist isn't just a ghost story, it's a perfect storm of family trauma, media sensation, scientific investigation, and perhaps something generally unexplainable. So settle in because we're about to explore one of the most documented paranormal cases in history. And trust me, the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. Let's set the scene. It's August 1977, and Britain is in the grip of economic uncertainty. The Sex Pistols are shocking the nation. Star Wars is playing in cinemas. And in a modest three-bedroom council house at 284 Green Street, Enfield, single mother Peggy Hodgkins is trying to raise four children on her own after a difficult divorce. The house itself is unremarkable. Built in the 1920s as part of a council estate, semi-detached with thin walls and small back garden. Peggy lives there with her children, Margaret, 13, Janet, 11, Johnny, 10, and Billy, 7. It's cramped, money is tight, and life is already challenging enough without the supernatural intervening. But on the evening of August 30th, 1977, something changed in that house forever. It started, as these things often do, with children complaining about noises. Margaret and Janet, sharing a bedroom, told their mother they could hear shuffling sounds coming from the next door. Sounds like furniture being moved around. Peggy initially dismissed this as typical sibling dramatics, but when the sound continued and grew louder, she decided to investigate. What she found would launch one of the most controversial paranormal investigations in British history. The girls' beds were shaking, not gently, not subtly, but violently bouncing up and down, as if an invisible giant was grabbing the mattress and throwing them around. Peggy tried to hold them off, still, but the force was way too strong. She checked for logical explanations, loose floorboards, vibrations from traffic, anything rational, but found nothing. Then came the knocking. Four distinct raps coming from inside the walls themselves, not the random settling sounds old houses make, but deliberate, rhythmic knocking that seemed to respond to human interaction. When Peggy knocked twice, four knocks came back. When she knocked four times, four knocks responded. By now, though thoroughly frightened, Peggy gathered her children and fled to the neighbors. Vic and Peggy Nottingham, who lived next door, came to investigate. What they witnessed that night convinced them this wasn't a prank or mass hysteria. They heard the knocking themselves, saw furniture moving without explanation, and more disturbingly, they watched young Janet appear to be thrown from her bed by an invisible force. They called the police. Now, here's where the story gets interesting from a historical perspective. PC Carolyn Heaps arrived at 284 Green Street around 1 a.m. on August 31st, expecting to deal with a domestic disturbance or perhaps a break in. Instead, she found herself face to face with something that challenged everything she understood about reality. Officer Heap's official police report, which still exists in the Metropolitan Police Archives, describes witnessing a heavy chair slide across the floor approximately 3 or 4 feet with no one near it. She examined the chair, checked for hidden wires or mechanisms, found nothing, and noted it in her report that she could not find a logical explanation for what she had observed. Think about that for a moment. A trained police officer, someone whose job requires skepticism and attention to detail, officially documented witnessing furniture move by itself. This wasn't a tabloid journalist looking for a story or a paranormal enthusiast with an agenda. This was a police constable doing her job. And what she saw was significant enough to include in an official report. But this was just the beginning. Word of the strange events at Green Street quickly spread through the community and beyond. By September 1977, the case had attracted the attention of the Society for Psychological Research, Britain's oldest paranormal investigation organization, founded in 1882 and boasting members like Arthur Conan Doyle and Nobel Prize winner Lord Riley. The SPR sent two investigators who would become central figures in the Enfield case, Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfield. Both men brought impressive credentials to their investigation. Gross was a successful investor and businessman who turned to paranormal research after the tragic death of his daughter Janet in a car accident. Playfair was an experienced paranormal investigator and author who had studied poltergeist cases in Brazil. What makes the Enfield case unique in paranormal history is the sheer volume of documentation these investigations accumulated. Over the course of 2 years, they recorded 200 hours of audio, took thousands of photos, and maintained detailed daily logs of events. They installed sophisticated recording equipment throughout the house and documented everything with scientific precision. The phenomenon they recorded was staggering in its variety and intensity. Furniture moved regularly, not just small objects, but heavy pieces like chests of in drawers and wardrobes. The family reported that bedroom furniture would rearrange itself overnight, with heavy items found stacked in impossible configurations. Drawers would open and close by themselves, often in sequence, as if operated by an invisible hand. Objects flew through the air for with no apparent source. Toys, books, clothes, and household items would suddenly launch themselves across the room, sometimes following trajectories that seemed to defy physics. A marble, for instance, was observed moving upward at a 45-degree angle before dropping, a movement that skeptics struggled to explain through conventional means. Perhaps the most disturbing were the phenomenon centered around 11-year-old Janet Hodgkins. Janet appeared to be the primary focus of the activity. She was frequently seen being thrown from her bed with considerable force, sometimes across the room. She would levitate, raising several feet into the air and floating for extended periods. Witnesses, including police officers, social workers, teachers, and journalists, documented these levitations with photographs and film footage. Most bizarrely, Janet began speaking in voices that weren't her own. The voice that became most prominent claimed to be Bill Wilkins, an elderly man who had died in the house years earlier. Through Janet, this voice would hold conversations with investigators, describe details about his death and life, and his connection to the house. The voice was gravelly, adult, completely different than Janet's normal speech pattern. Medical examiners confirmed that when the voice spoke, Janet's vocal cords weren't moving in ways consistent with normal speech production. Doctors who examined her during these episodes were baffled by the psychologically impossibility of what they were observing. Guy Lyon Playfair recorded hours of these voice conversations. The transcripts make for fascinating reading. Bill would complain about the family living in his house, describe his death from a hemorrhage in the corner chair of the living room, and provide specific details about the house's history that were later verified through historical records. But here's where the case becomes truly complex. Not everything could be easily explained by genuine paranormal activity. No examination of the Enfield poltergeist would be complete without addressing the elephant in the room, the evidence of trickery. From the beginning, skeptics pointed out that many of the phenomenon occurred when Janet was present and unobserved. Magician and skeptic James Randi argued that the entire case could be explained by clever child trickery, combined with wishful thinking and confirmation bias from investigators who wanted to believe. And there was indeed evidence that Janet could and did fake some of the phenomena. On several occasions, investigators caught Janet throwing objects and attempting to bend spoons through normal means. She was observed making the distinctive knocking sound by hitting objects against the wall or floor. Video footage exists of Janet clearly using her hands to throw toys while trying to make it appear they were moving by themselves. When confronted with this evidence, Janet admitted to faking some events. She claimed she did it because the investigators seemed disappointed when nothing was happening, and she felt pressure to produce phenomena. She estimated that perhaps 2% of the events were fake. But here's where the case becomes generally puzzling. That 98% that Janet insisted were real incidents, some of them were well documented, witnessed events in paranormal history. The levitations, for example, were captured on film by photographer Graham Morris. They weren't blurred, questionable images, but clear photographs showing Janet several feet above her bed in positions that were extremely difficult to fake. Morris, a professional photographer with no belief in the paranormal, admits he could not explain how the images were created if they were a hoax. More compelling is the testimony of witnesses who had no reason to lie or embellish. Various independent witnesses reported unusual experiences, Though the specific details of their accounts vary in different sources. BBC radio presenter Rosalind Morris, no relation to the photographer, was among the media figures who reported witnessing unusual events during visits to the house. The consistency of accounts from multiple independent observers, including journalists and other professionals, added weight to the case in the minds of believers. Then there was the audio recordings that couldn't be easily dismissed. The voice of Bill Wilkins was recorded under various conditions, including times when investigators attempted to control for fraud. Voice analysis conducted on the recordings noted unusual characteristics, though experts disagreed about their significance and origin. Medical professionals who examined Janet during voice episodes found the phenomenon difficult to explain through normal speech production, though some suggested possible explanations involving unusual vocal techniques. Perhaps most intriguing, historical research confirmed many of the details Bill provided about the house and his life. He correctly described the layout of the house before the renovations that had occurred after his death. He knew the names of previous residents and specific events that had occurred in the neighborhood decades earlier. So we're faced with a paradox. Clear evidence of some hoaxing, combined with phenomenon that seems to defy conventional explanation. By early 1978, the Enfield Poltergeist had become a media sensation. The story had everything Fleet Street would want: working class family, supernatural terror, children in danger, and enough photographic evidence to fill front pages for weeks. The Daily Mail was the first major newspaper to cover the story extensively, sending reporter Douglas Bentz to live in the house and document events firsthand. Bentz, initially skeptical, became a believer after witnessing phenomenon he could not explain. His articles brought national attention to the case and sparked a media feeding frenzy. Television crews from the BBC, Psalms Television, and other networks descended on Green Street. The house became a tourist attraction, with curious onlookers gathering outside daily. The attention put enormous pressure on the Hodgkins family, who were already struggling with the psychological impact of the phenomenon. The media coverage revealed the class tension underlying British society in the late 1970s. Many commentators suggested that the working class family was either lying for attention or too unsophisticated to recognize natural explanations for unusual events. The sorry about that. The implications was that paranormal phenomenon couldn't possibly occur in a council house, as if ghosts respected property values. This class based skepticism ignored the impressive credentials of many witnesses. The phenomenon were observed by police officers, social workers, child psychiatrists, journalists, photographers, and academics. These weren't gullible working class people seeing things that weren't there. These were trained professionals with reputations to protect. The case also highlighted generational divides in the British society. Older, more traditional witnesses were often more accepting of paranormal explanations, while younger, more scientifically educated observers leaned towards skepticism. This created fascinating tension within the investigation team itself. Religious leaders weighed in on all sides. Some angelical uh, clergy suggested the family needed spiritual counseling rather than exorcism. Catholic priests offered traditional blessing ceremonies. New Age spiritualists proposed alternative healing methods. The diversity of religious response reflected the changing spiritual landscape of the 1970s Britain. The international media attention was equally intense. American television networks sent crews to document the case. European newspapers ran daily updates. The story resonated globally because it seemed to offer proof of that the supernatural could intrude into ordinary lives anywhere at any time. But media attention brought its own problems. One aspect of the Enfield case that often gets overlooked in discussions of flying furniture and mysterious voices is the profound psychological trauma experienced by the Hodgkins family. Peggy Hodgkins was a single mother dealing with the aftermath of a difficult divorce, raising four children on a limited income in cramped conditions. The paranormal activity began just as the family was struggling to establish a new normal after the father's departure. Child psychiatrists who studied the case noted the poltergeist activity often correlates with periods of family stress and adolescent turmoil. Janet, the primary focus of the phenomenon, was 11 years old, approaching puberty and dealing with her parents' separation. She was described by teachers as intelligent but troubled, struggling academically and socially. The timing of the paranormal activity coincided with her psychological development wasn't lost on investigation. Dr. John Beloff, a respected parapsychiatrist from Edinburgh University and former president of the Society for Psych- Psychiatrical Research, investigated the case but reached skeptical conclusions. Along with fellow SPR member Dr. Anita Gregory, Beloff concluded that Janet and Margaret were likely playing tricks on the investigators. Beloff specifically suggested that Janet was practicing ventriloquism to produce the mysterious voice. This skeptical assessment from within the paranormal research community itself was significant, as these were investigators who generally believed in the possibility of genuine psychic phenomenon. The psychological pressure on the family intensified as the case gained publicity. They became prisoners in their own home, unable to leave without being followed by reporters and curiosity seekers. The children couldn't attend school normally because classmates and teachers treated them as celebrities or freaks. Margaret, Janet's older sister, developed anxiety symptoms and began having nightmares. Johnny and Billy, the younger boys, showed signs of trauma and behavioral problems. The entire family was referred to child psychiatrists who documented the psychological impact of living with unexplained phenomenon. Social services became involved, raising the possibility that the children might be removed from the home. The situation was deemed harmful to their welfare. This added another layer of stress to the already overwhelming situation. But perhaps the most disturbing was the psychological toll on Janet herself. During the period when the Bill Wilkins voice spoke through her, Janet appeared ever trance like entering trance like states. She would have no memory of what was said or done while the voice was active. Medical examinations during these episodes showed changes in her brainwave patterns and physical responses that couldn't be easily explained. Child psychiatrists who examined Janet found no evidence of multiple personality disorder or dissociative conditions that might explain the voice phenomenon. He appeared to be normal. If stressed 11-year-old girl when not experiencing paranormal activity. The long term psychological effect on Janet became apparent years later. As an adult, she reported ongoing anxiety, difficulty forming relationships, and recurring nightmares about the events. She described feeling like her childhood had been stolen and replaced with something she never wanted. What sets the Enfield case apart from most paranormal reports is the rigorous scientific methodology applied by investigators Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfield. Weren't casual ghost hunters. They approached the case with systematic documentation and analysis. They installed sophisticated recording equipment throughout the house, including temperature sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, and motion activated cameras. They created detailed floor plans and documented the exact location and time of all reported phenomena. They maintain logs of the environment and conditions, family activities, and witness statements. The investigators established protocols for documenting events, requiring multiple witnesses and photographic evidence whenever possible. They brought in experts from various fields to examine the evidence and provide independent analysis. Dr. Anita Gregory, a psychological lecturer from London, spent considerable time in the house conducting controlled experiments. She attempted to recreate the phenomenon through normal means, testing whether furniture could be moved by hidden mechanisms or whether sounds could be produced through conventional methods, and whether the voice phenomenon could be explained by ventriloquism or fraud. While Gregory found evidence of some trickery, she also documented events that she could not explain through conventional means. Her detailed reports, preserved in the Society of Psychological Research archives, provide some of the most objective analysis of the case. Psych- Physical evidence was collected and analyzed by various experts. Photographs were examined for signs of tampering and manipulation. Audio recordings were subjected to voice analysis and acoustic studies. The results were mixed and often contradictory. Some photographic analysis found no obvious evidence of tampering with certain images. Voice analysts of the Bill Wilkins recordings revealed unusual characteristics, though experts disagreed about their significance. Temperature measurements allegedly documented sudden localized drops during periods of activity. Through the methodology and reliability of these measurements have been questioned. The investigators did document patterns in the phenomenon that seemed to suggest some form of intelligence or organization behind the activity. The knocking sounds often follow complex rhythms and appeared to respond to questions and in requests. Objects moved in a way that seemed purposefully rather than random. The voice interactions showed what appeared to be a pers- personality, knowledge, and emotional responses. However, skeptics argued that these patterns could be explained by the unconscious desires of the investigators to find meaning in random events, or by the children learning to respond to the expectation of the adults around them. The scientific documentation of the Enfield case remains one of the most comprehensive paranormal investigations ever conducted. While it did not provide definitive proof of supernatural activity, it established that witnesses reported unusual events that couldn't be easily dismissed, even as questions remained about their ultimate origin and explanation. As we dig deeper into the Enfield case, we encounter layers of mystery that extend far beyond the simple haunting narrative. The historical research into 284 Green Street revealed that Bill Wilkins had indeed died in the house in 1976, as the voice had claimed. However, dramatic claims about patterns of unusual deaths and tragedies at the property are difficult to verify and may be embellished. While some previous residents reportedly experienced problems establishing clear patterns or supernatural connections remains speculative. Some previous tenants reportedly experienced various problems while living in the house. So, whether these are related to the property itself, normal life stresses, or other factors remains unclear. The pattern suggested by believers may reflect the human tendency to find connections where none exist. Some researchers noted geological features in the area, including underground streams and limestone formations. Whether these might create electromagnetic anomalies that could affect human behavior remains speculative, as no definitive causal relationship has been established. Some neighbors reportedly experienced unusual events during the same period, though the extent and reliability of these accounts vary. The timing of the events showed some patterns that investigators found significant, though skeptics argued that these could be explained by suggestion, shared psychological states, or selective reporting. The timing of the events also showed curious patterns. Activities peaked during periods of emotional stress for the family, but also seemed to correlate with specific dates and times. The anniversary of Bill Wilkins' death consistently showed increased paranoia. Activity was more intense during storms and periods of high bar- barometric barometric pressure. Reports of similar cases in other locations during the same period may reflect increased media attention to the poltergeist phenomenon rather than genuine increase in supernatural activity. The apparent parallels could be explained by copycat cases, shared cultural influences, or simply increased awareness and reporting of such events. The Enfield case attracted intense scrutiny from the professional skeptics and debunkers, leading to some of the most detailed critical analysis ever applied to a paranormal case. Magician James Randi offered $10,000 reward for proof that the phenomenon were generally supernatural. He argued that everything observed could be explained through stage magic techniques, and she suggested that the investigators were either incompetent or complacent in the deception. Randy's analysis focused on the mechanical aspects of the phenomenon. He demonstrated how furniture could be moved using hidden wires and pulleys, how objects could be thrown to create an illusion of spontaneous flight, and how effects could be produced through ventriloquism and electronic manipulation. However, Randy never visited the house during the active period or examined the evidence firsthand. His debunking was based on the theoretical possibilities rather than direct investigation of the specific phenomenon documented at Enfield. Some serious criticism came from Professor Christopher French of Goldsmith College, London, who studied the case extensively. French argued that the combination of suggestion, expectation, and select memory could explain most witness reports. He suggested the investigators had unconsciously shaped the phenomenon through their expectations and questions. French's psychological analysis focused on the family dynamic and environmental stresses that might have created conditions for mass hysteria or shared delusions. He noted that the poltergeist cases typically involve families experience psychological turmoil and suggests that the phenomenon were manifestations of internal conflicts rather than external supernatural activities. Journalist Melvin Harris conducted an independent investigation and claimed to have identified several instances of outright fraud. He accused the investigators of suppressing evidence of trickery and selectively reporting only phenomena that supported their paranormal hypothesis. Harris's criticism raised important questions about investigator bias and the reliability of witness testimony. He argued that the desire to prove the supernatural had compromised the objectivity of the investigation. However, skeptical analysis also revealed weaknesses in the debunking attempt. Many critics focused on the easiest phenomenon to explain while ignoring the most compelling evidence. The levitation photos, the voice recordings, and the testimonial of independent witnesses were often dismissed without adequate analysis. The suggestion that everything could be explained by child trickery ignored the sophistication required to produce some of the documented phenomenon. An 11-year-old girl would need considerable knowledge of stage magic, electronics, and psychology to fake the complex interactions observed by trained investigators. Most significantly, the skeptical explanation couldn't account for the physical evidence. The photographic documentations, audio recordings, and testimonials of multiple independent witnesses created a body of evidence that required increasingly elaborate conspiracy theories to dismiss. The Enfield poltergeist gained renowned attention in 2016 with the release of The Conjuring 2, which brought the case to a global audience, but also significantly distorted the historical facts. The film portrayed Ed and Lorraine Warren as the primary investigators, when in reality, they only made a brief appearance visit to the house and played no significant role in the investigation. The movie emphasized demonic possession themes that were not present in the original case and added fictional elements like the Crooked Man demon that had no basis on the documented phenomena. These Hollywood distortions created a new layer of mythology around the case that often overshadows the historical facts. Many people now remember events from the movie as if they were real aspects of the original investigation. The film's success also brought unwanted attention back to the Hodgkins family. Janet, now an adult with her own family, found herself thrust back into the spotlight she had spent decades trying to escape. The renewed media interest opened old wounds and forced her to relive traumatic experiences she had worked hard to overcome. However, the movie also introduced the case to a new generation of investigators and researchers. Academic interest in the Enfield case has increased, with universities offering courses that examine it as a historical and psychological phenomenon rather than simply a paranormal event. The Hollywood treatment highlights how paranormal cases become transformed through popular culture, often losing their historical context and human impact in favor of entertainment value. Today, more than 40 years after the events of 284 Green Street, the Enfield poltergeist remains a controversial and puzzling as ever. Modern technology has allowed for new analysis of the original evidence. Digital enhancements of photos has revealed details not visible in the original prints. Computer analysis of audio recordings has identified acoustic patterns that weren't detectable in the 1970s. Statistical analysis of the documents phenomenon has revealed patterns that suggest non random organization. Yet none of this modern analysis has provided a definitive answers. The enhanced photographs show more detail, but don't resolve questions about authenticity. The audio analysis reveal unusual patterns, but don't prove supernatural origins. The statistical studies show organization, but don't identify the organizing intelligence. Complementary contemporary parapsychiatrists continue to study the case as one of the best documented examples of alleged poltergeist activity. The sheer volume of the evidence, thousands of photos, hundreds of hours of recordings, detailed witness statements from dozens of people, making it impossible to dismiss entirely. But the case has also become a cautionary tale about the dangers of paranormal investigation. The psychological trauma experienced by the Hodgkins family raises ethical questions about subjecting families to intensive investigations and media attention. Janet Hodgkins, now in her 50s, has spoken publicly about the lasting impact of the events. She described feeling like her childhood was sacrificed to satisfy others' curiosity about the supernatural. The attention and investigation were also well intentioned, may have prolonged and intensified trauma that might have been resolved naturally. The case also illustrates how paranormal claims become embedded in popular culture and take on lives of their own. The facts of the Enfield case have been modified and embellished through the countless retellings, creating a mythology that may bear little resemblance to the original case. Modern skeptics continue to propose natural explanations for the phenomenon, focusing on psychological factors, environmental influences, and social dynamics that might have created conditions for unusual experiences. But these explanations, while plausible, remain theoretical rather than proven. The central question remains unanswered. The questions remain unanswered. What actually happened at 284 Green Street? How much genuine paranormal activity was there? How much was conscious fraud? How much was unconscious psychological phenomenon? And perhaps most importantly, what does the case tell us about the nature of reality itself? As we reach the end of the deep dive into the Enfield Poltergeist, we're left with more questions than answers. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. The case defies simple categorization. It's neither clearly supernatural nor obviously fraudulent. It exists in that uncomfortable gray area where conventional explanations break down and unconventional ones seem inadequate. What can we say with certainty is that something extraordinary happened to the Hodgkins family between 1977 and 1979. Whether that something was paranormal activity, psychological phenomenon, or elaborate deception may be less important than understanding its impact on the people involved and the questions it raised about the nature of evidence, belief, and reality. The Enfield case forces us to confront our assumptions about what's possible, what's probable. It challenges our faith in rational explanation and scientific methodology. It reminds us that there are still mysteries in this world that resist our attempts to categorize and understand them. But perhaps the most importantly, it reminds us that behind every paranormal case are real people experiencing real trauma, seeking real answers. The Hodgkin family didn't ask to become the center of one of the history's most famous ghost stories. They were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, trying to cope with experiences that challenged everything they understood about reality. Today, 284 Green Street stands quietly in Enfield, occupied by a family who reports no unusual activity. The house has remained remembered to being what it always was, a modest council home where ordinary people live ordinary lives. But the question raised by what happened there in the late 1970s continues to resonate. They remind us that the reality may be far stronger and more complex than we'd imagine, and that some mysteries may be more valuable as questions than as answers. The Enfield Poltergeist remains what it has always been, a puzzle without definitive solution, a mystery that reveals as much about us as it does about the nature of the unexplained. That's all for tonight's deep dive into the Enfield Poltergeist. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and in share it with anyone who appreciates a good mystery. This has been the Common Historian. I'm your host, Jeremy, and I'll see you in the past.